Hi there, everybody, and welcome this evening. Sorry we're starting a few minutes late. We had some technical difficulties. Thank you so much for coming and for joining us for an online program. We have a lot of other online programs. We're going to go ahead and put a link in the chat for all of our other events. And there's one on dilly beans next week. So if you're interested in canning and preservation, you might also be interested in that one. And we're also linking to our presenter this evening is Christina Ward, who is the author of this book, Preservation, the Art and Science of Canning, Fermentation, and Dehydration. We do have this in the library system if you'd like to check it out. And I'm also sharing a link to Boswell's. You can buy it at Boswell if you like your own copy. Christina is a writer, editor, publisher, listener, share, teacher, and connector. And she's done a few programs for us before. We're so happy to have her this evening. Christina, I'm going to go ahead and give it over to you. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to my kitchen. We had an idea to do something with a multi-camera system, and we're going to really break some technological barriers, but it didn't quite work out, hence the technological difficulties. So bear with me, because the idea tonight was to make jam, very much like an actual class that I would teach. So you're in my kitchen and we're going to make jam. So bear with me. I might grab that camera a little bit and I want you to see what we're doing, because we are going to make jam. One of the questions that a lot of folks have in making jam is, especially now, is do you have to actually can it? Something you should know is that food preservation is about hurdle technology. It's about erecting different barriers against pathogens. And so when you cook a food, by heating it, you are killing pathogens. When you add sugar or salt to a food, what you're doing is drawing the water away from a food to make it last longer, to help reduce the things that pathogens like. So the more technology we use, the more hurdles we erect against pathogens, the safer our food is. And if we use the right combination of hurdles, we can make our food last a long time. So for the instance of jam, when you're making jam, you're using a couple of those hurdle technologies, specifically sugar, which again draws the water away from the actual food. Even though it's liquid, it's not really water, it's a chemistry thing. It's bonding with the heat, and then that available water for the germs isn't there anymore. And then by using a canner, which is, we've got it, wait, there's the canner, the canning pot, by using the jars, by putting the jars and then submerging into a boiling water process, we change the pressure in the jar and drive it out. It's just a small, tiny change, but that's enough to drive out any of the available oxygen, and then we deprive germs of available water, of oxygen, and then with the heat, those combinations make it then shelf stable for up to a year, maybe a little bit more, but usually rule of thumb is a year. One of the things that's happening now is a lot of folks with the pandemic have been home a lot, have been gardening, and they're finding that there's been a run on canning jars. I was actually interviewed about that for the Wisconsin Farm Journal. So one of the things you can do is make jam, and make freezer jam. It is absolutely perfectly wonderful to make freezer jam. And I thought we'd make that first. You need a couple specialty items. First, fruit. We're going to start because we're making a fruit jam. And the other element, the thing that makes a jam, is that it's thickened. So if you look at the history of jam, you look at the European jams, the very early ones, they're thickened because they have a fruit that's a natural fiber called pectin. And as the heat heats up with a fruit that has a large amount of pectin, it breaks down and it begins to gel when it combines with the sugars. Fruits with a lot of pectin are oranges, currants, gooseberries, apples have a ton of pectin. So when you go back and you read really old recipes, you'll find that they usually start with, even a strawberry jam recipe has, like, throw a couple apples in. So they didn't have a powdered pectin like we have today. That came after World War I. Powdered pectin is a natural product. It's derived from orange rinds. It's a byproduct of the orange juice industry. And so what they do is they take the extra rinds and they use a chemical process with alcohol to pull that pectin out, and then they powder it and dehydrate it, and then they sell it to you. And what that does is it allows you to take fruits that are normally low in pectin and then make them into jam without that additional step of having to add a lot of apples or oranges. So it makes jam making really easier. They also have a new kind of pectin, which is out there. I'm going to grab it. I'm going to reach around the table here. This is a pectin called freezer pectin. Wait, let's get it. Freezer pectin. Freezer pectin is essentially made for a no-cook freezer jam. And again, with the jar shortage, and if you're in a bind, that can be a real lifesaver. So what we're going to do first off is make a really quick freezer jam. I've pre-measured a few things here, so we're going to do that. I'm going to move the camera over, and what we have is some peaches. One of the things that folks will ask me in classes is that do you have to make fresh things all the time? I know it's the story of, oh, you went and you went to the peach truck and you got the 3 cases of peaches, and then you're up all night trying to make jam or something. You can prep your peaches, you can prep your strawberries, you can prep your whatever and put them in the freezer, and then come back and make jam later. It works. All right, here we go. I'm going to adjust that camera just a little bit so we get to where we're going. Let's see. Here we have peaches that I got from the peach truck. This is 4 cups, and now they're defrosted. And I'm going to put them in a bowl. Let's see. One of the things with making the jam is you can have a choice of sugar. It's really fun. You can add a lot of flavor when you do different sugars. Of course, you can use a white sugar. You can use a honey. You can use something like a brown sugar, which is what I was going to use right now. I'm moving the camera a little bit. Sorry, I didn't mean to give everybody a migraine. And you can use, when you're using the freezer pectin, you can use an artificial sweetener. Unfortunately, you can't use artificial sweeteners when you're making a processed jam, only for a freezer jam. So I'm going to back the camera up, and we're going to get our next ingredient, which is the brown sugar. And here's our brown sugar measured out. And so we have 4 cups. So we have the pre-measured, and the recipe for this is right on the container, so it's really easy. So we're just going to use 4 tablespoons of the freezer pectin. This is a super great project to work with kids too. So 1 heaping, 2, 3, 4, and away we go. In my kitchen, I have some old tools. There we go. This is a chopper. So I'm taking my frozen peaches that are defrosted. I'm mixing it. I'm just going to chop this all together. You can probably hear it's kind of working on my stove here as I'm chopping and mixing. And what that's going to do is help thicken everything up. The thing with the freezer pectin is you don't have to cook it. It comes together naturally. The one thing you do need to do, regardless if you're doing a freezer pectin, using a freezer pectin or a regular pectin, is you do have to acidify. Even if you think a fruit has enough acid, you have to add a little bit of lemon juice. A little bit is 2 tablespoons. 2 tablespoons right there. And jam should be about flavor, and we're in Wisconsin. So what goes really well with peaches? All right, Mr. Cameraman, we're getting the Corbel. Just a little snort in there for the peaches. So peach brandy, brown sugar. I'm going to stir that together. And there we go. It's going to take a few minutes, and when it sets, we're going to put it into special jars that are made for the freezer. Because glass jars often will crack, so they make special plastic ones. So we're going to set that aside. And in the meantime, now we're going to make our regular cooked jam. I've got strawberries here. This is our standard recipe for strawberry jam. These have been topped. So I did hear a horror story once of somebody cried once. They called me, they made their jam and it was brown. and I walked them through it. And what happened was they forgot to take the tops off. So make sure you cut the tops off. And there you go. Pour them into your pot. And we're going to start heating it up. And these have been frozen because, again, like I said, you can freeze them and then work with them later. And so what we're going to do is put it on a nice medium high, and we want that to come up to boil. And then we're going to add sugar to that. So it's a kind of a boil, set, boil, set, boil, set, keep kind of steps over and over again. We're going to add our sugar right away, or I'm sorry, our lemon juice right away. So 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. I like to use organic lemon juice. 1, 2. Another thing that is available to makers is a low sugar jam, pectin. Now, when you hear the word pectin, we've been talking about it, there's 2 different kinds. There's regular pectin and then low sugar. There is no sugar in the actual pectin. What they're talking about is how much sugar is needed to make it set, to make that reaction, that set happen. And so if you use a low sugar jam, it has extra sucrose in it, which means you need to use less sugar to make it set. And this is fantastic if you are looking to control your sugar amounts. And so if you like a jam that tastes less sweet, definitely use a low sugar jam. And so these are just 2 brands. A lot of times when you're not finding your jam supplies, if you go to an area like Mennonite Amish store, they've got jam supplies, and it's usually in bulk. And that's kind of what I like to use. This is a low sugar jam from the Brubaker's Mennonite store in Lena, Wisconsin. One of my favorites. They've been trying to recruit me for years. So as we get that ready, this is going to come up. One of the things to note, you don't have to use a copper pan. You can use a stainless steel pan. But the thing to make sure you use when you're cooking your fruit for your jam is to use a non-reactive pan. You don't want to use an aluminum pot because it will react with the sugars and it kind of puts an off taste to everything. So make sure you use a non-reactive pan. So I'm turning the heat just up a little bit there. I'm grabbing a wooden spoon to stir this around. And this will come up to boil quite quickly. While we're waiting for that, we're going to talk about jars for a second, because people will ask about jars, especially with the great jar shortage. These are jelly jars. They are 8 ounces. When you're making jam or jelly, you don't really want to go larger than that. Sometimes you'll see they make pint jars, they make quarts, but they doesn't set up as well if you try to can it in a larger than 8-ounce jars. They also make 4-ounce jars. You can get a 4-ounce jar. That works really well. And you can get fancy 8-ounce jars. It's kind of in canning language, they call these squatties. It's a squatty. But here's the thing. You got to use a canning jar. You can't use an old peanut butter jar or an old mayonnaise jar. I know, even if all the stores are out of jars, you've got to use a canning jar. And here's why. Canning jars are a special formula of glass. And what they are is they're made to be used in the hot water, the boiling water, over and over and over again. Whereas peanut butter, mayonnaise jars are not. They're just made to be in that giant chemical process, or that steam process that they go through at the factory just the one time. Whereas these jars are made to go through, in and out of the hot water lots of times without cracking. I've got canning jars from the 1930s. And so don't throw them away. As long as your canning jars aren't cracked and aren't chipped, you can use them for a very long time. So take care of your canning jars. And if you give somebody a jar of jam and they don't return the jar, don't give them anything ever again. They're on the bad list. So now our strawberries are boiling, and so we can add our sugar. So I'm going to reach over to our sugar, and I'm going to make it with low sugar. So I'm going to use, we used 4 cups of strawberries, so we're using 2 cups of sugar. This is a half a cup measure. So 1 cup, 1.5, and 2. And I'm gonna, you notice I did not adjust the heat. I'm gonna keep boiling there. And we're gonna keep going. We want that sugar to dissolve. We want that to cook for a few minutes because we want those strawberries to release all of their juice, and we want them to absorb some of that sugar. And you can see there's a lot more liquid than when we started. Now, the other thing that when you're making jam, you can make a strawberry jam with just sugar and strawberries. Fantastic. It's going to taste great. But you can also add some other things to it. We add a little brandy to the peach jam. That's going to be really good. Things that go really well with strawberries is basil, fresh basil. Chop that up. You can put that in there. If you've got some rhubarb, you can mix some rhubarb in there too. You can mix some fruit together. Use your imagination. As long as you keep your ratios the same, you know, and if you buy a box of Pectin, that ratio is in the book or in the box. Follow it. If you check out my book, Preservation, all the ratios are in there. Follow those. The Center for Home Food Preservation on the website, they have a website with recipes. You can follow those there. So you can be very creative as long as you follow the ratios, because that's what's going to keep you safe from making sure it doesn't go into the danger zone. And what the danger zone means is that something is that you're not using enough sugar, you're not using enough acidification. And then all of a sudden you've got something that, you know, when we talked about, you don't have enough hurdles against the pathogens, and that's how somebody gets sick. So the equivalent of 1 box of Pectin is 1/3 of a cup. So I'm going to put in my 1/3 of a cup of my Pectin. I'm sprinkling it in because it goes better sprinkled. There we go. I'm going to let this, I've stirred it in, and I'm going to let this come to a boil. All right, while that's going, here's our big canner pot right over here. Now, any pot could be a canner pot as long as it's tall and, you know, it's tall enough to fill with water and that you can fit your jars in. A lot of the stores now have what they call the Canning Discovery Kit. It's really about 10 bucks. Comes with a silicone basket, so you can make any stock pot into a canner. They're great. I started preheating this earlier. So when you start, you want that water to be boiling before you put your jars in. So we're gonna get that going. Our strawberries here are boiling. We want that to boil hard for about 1 minute. 1 minute. We're almost there. We pre-washed our jars. A lot of times people get, you know, that old way of doing it, you had to sterilize things. Yes, sterilization was needed in the days when people were making soap out of fly. You don't need to do that anymore. If you have a dishwasher, wash your jars in the dishwasher, take them out. Otherwise, hot soapy water works great. We did that already. I'm going to turn the heat off. One of the things that makes people very sad is when their jam doesn't set. You know, they go through all the work and then it doesn't set. There's a way to prevent that, and that's testing. So before we put it in the jars, we're going to test it. We call this the Moses test. We're going to take just a little bit out. I have a little dish. I'm going to take that. I'm just putting a little bit in. That's going to cool off. And then if it's set in that little dish in a few minutes, then we'll know it's set. We don't have to worry about it. If it's not set, we can fix it. We can put more Pectin in. We can recook it. We can repair it from here. Otherwise, we really can't. So once it's in the jar and processed, that's it. That's what it's going to be. You know, you can still eat it, of course. It'll just be like a sauce. The old rule is don't tell anybody you meant to make jam. Just tell them you meant to make sauce. So if you look at our stuff, we're almost ready to go. We've got our canner going. We're waiting for our set here. We're looking at our peaches. And again, as we do this on the fly, I'm grabbing a spatula to look at our peaches. It's starting to thicken. I think my brandy may have thrown our measurements off, but that's okay, what I can do, because with our freezer jam, nice and easy. If it doesn't thicken up, just add another couple teaspoons of the freezer Pectin. I'm going to stir that one in. All right, I'm stirring. A lot of times what happens, I get questions, I get calls, is people are afraid of canning because of, you heard rightly some of the horror stories of people dying from something that was poorly canned. That happens. That's called botulism. And more likely happens from things that are very low in acid, things that are like meat, green beans, vegetables that are in water, not pickled. So things that are highly acidified, things like jams and jellies, pickled things, are very rarely are they prone to things like, a botulism. So don't worry so much about that, but still be safe. If somebody gives you a jar of jam or pickle and you see like a little bit of mold on it or something, don't eat it. Really, don't eat it. I know they're old rules. People, would like, oh, just scrape it off. It's fine. It's not fine. Because if you can see mold, that means there's like billions of little spores going through the bottom that you don't see. So don't eat it. So, all right, we're going to check our, call this, let's see, how do we do? Nope. Nope, we do that, see? It ran together. So what you do is we just turn our pot back on and we just bring it right back up to boil. And we just add a little bit more pectin and it's gonna set right up. Now, at the risk of, I've done this in class a lot, is usually what we do is we call the bad pot. We make this, I always mismeasure one pot just to show you how, flexible it is, how at home you shouldn't be afraid, that you should try and know that you can make a little adjustment here and there and you can repair things and it's okay. And you should never give up on it. It's always okay to keep trying. And as long as, it's not moldy, it's good. So our pot's gonna come up for boil real quick and we're just gonna add, it doesn't take as much, it just usually takes like a teaspoon more of the pectin. I'm gonna add 2 for good measure. And again, you do want that to come up and boil hard again. I've made jam in class before. We do it together. This is my first time doing it on a computer screen. So you're part of the experiment here. And so we are going to test it again. I never trust that everything's good. So much so, I have another clean dish because we know. We just have to wait for that to come up to our boil point. And our peach stuff is getting nice and thick. It just needs a few more minutes. And that's how the freezer jam works. You just wait for it. It just takes a little while to set and then you freeze it. The freezer containers, again, I mentioned earlier, are made of plastic and you can get these ball and they make a nice lid. What happens if you put the glass in the freezer is the cells of the fruit kind of expand when they're frozen, and if you in a glass jar, it tends to break them. And so you shouldn't use glass jars in the freezer at all. So plastic works really well. So we're getting a good boil. We're gonna turn this off. We're gonna test it again. And just a few drips of the juice. I'm going to talk about the consistency. You can tell I left these berries pretty whole in here, and technically that's more of a preserve. You can mash the berries up, and you could puree it. That's the best part about making your own is that you get to make it the way you want. You get to make the consistency you want. If you're making like a blackberry or raspberry jam, you don't like seeds, put it through like a conical sieve and remove all the seeds. You get to do it any way you want to do it. So we're having a small technical difficulty with in the form of a cat. So we're going to do a little cat extraction. Bear with us just a moment. So as we go back, we're going to check our pot is almost boiling. And now if we check our set again, And look at that. We call that the Moses test, because when you run your finger through it, like the Red Sea, see, it stays parted. That's your test. Now you know that when you put it in the jar, it is going to stay jam. It's not a mystery. So our next step is you're going to see we're going to put some stuff in jars and we're going to put it in the canner. There's a couple specialty tools to help you do this. I recommend getting them. This is a jar funnel. A jar funnel. They come in plastic. This is an old one made of glass with a big crack in it, but I like it because you can see it. There's something very specific to canning called a headspace, and you never fill a jar up to the actual rim. You have to leave a little negative space for the air to escape, for that like weird pressurization. For jam, it's very small. It is 1/4 inch. And this particular step tool is a very easy way to measure each.
Show that again.
Sure. So there's the stepper tool. And so you measure it by straight up and down. Remember, just like science class and chemistry, when you had to, you know, how you measure things, you can't wobble, you have to be straight up and down. And so we're going to fill a glass, one of the jars. You can use a ladle. I tend to like to use a measuring cup. It works a little. You are going to make a mess. It's just guaranteed. I happen to be a klutz, so I make a little bit more mess than other people. And so, but I also have a pretty good eye, and you will, over time, develop a pretty good eye as to where your fill line is. Don't try to, you don't have to fill it perfectly the first time, like with the first pour. You can overfill it, you can underfill it, because then what you can do is use a measuring spoon to adjust it. So if I take my next jars, and I can measure it, that one's still a little short, that's a little short, and so you can kind of finesse it with a tablespoon. So we're going to have 3 jars here. And I'm going to make sure that we get to the right headspace. It is a little futzy, but it's worth it. If you don't have the headspace correct, all of the calculations for the processing will be off. And if the processing calculations are off, then you have not expressed enough air out of the jar, and then you are prone possibly to having a pathogen. Again, we are erecting hurdles against pathogens. So our next step is to do a very important thing that sounds not important, but is. I'm moving a couple things out of the way. We put our lids and bands on. And so if there's any kind of material or schmutz on the rim of the jar, it won't seal. So here's my party trick for today. Don't do this at home, right? So you just take a little bit of hot water, and then you wipe just the rim, just a little bit. All you gotta do, even if it doesn't look like there's any material there, you still gotta wipe it off, because, see, it doesn't even look like it, but there's stuff there. All right, and then I'm gonna put lids on. 1, 2, 3. Do you have to wash the lids or soak them or boil them? Not anymore. You used to, but they remade these lids that you don't have to. So that's good news. One less step. The bands are reusable, and they can be used as many times as you like, as long as they don't get bent up or rusty. So when you're putting your band on, you twist it until it just starts to tighten. In directions, you'll see this noted as finger tightening, just like finger tights. They even make a fancy $10 tool. You don't need it. As soon as you start to feel the resistance, Then you stop turning. That's all it is. Sometimes these are really cheap metal, so I'm just kind of, this one's bent a little bit. That's okay. All right. Finger tighten. And now what I'm going to do is put these in the canner. They don't go into the pot. They have to go in a rack. So I'm going to set these guys in the rack. And then we're going to set them in the pot. I have asbestos hands. I would suggest you use hot pads at home. And here you go. When you start with your canner, you fill it halfway up with water. The displacement of the weight of the jars then covers them. Ideally, you have them a few inches over the top of the jars. And so I'm getting my phone out, and we're going to set a timer for 5 minutes. So while that is processing, because that's all it takes is 5 minutes. And that's why that headspace is so critical, because the processing time is so little. And so while we wait for those to process, we've got our freezer jam. And so this will thicken up more as it freezes. And so it's very simple. Just scoop it into the container. And again, with the freezer, it will expand in the freezer, so you don't fill it to the top. You leave the same amount, about that 1/4 inch from the top. And the same thing, you want to wipe it off and wipe out the outside. And then fit the lid on. And then these are safe to go in the freezer. The same recommended time for storage in the freezer as would be in the pantry. So I would recommend getting a Sharpie when you're making things and write the date on it. You always think you're going to remember, you don't. So write the date on with a Sharpie. I say a Sharpie because it stays on. If you write even before the canning process, it stays on the metal. It'll stay on the plastic. That's a really good way to make sure that you're using your canned goods before their expiration date. As that's processing, it's just going to take a few minutes more. I'm looking at our computer timer here. We can start, we're going to be asking questions, and I'm going to answer them with the help of Fawn at the library. So now's a good time as we are waiting for our thing. I'm going to keep talking a minute, but I want to give you a heads up. Now's the time. I'm going to answer any kind of question you have about food preservation. You can talk about jam making. You can talk about pickling. You can talk about pressure canning. You can talk about dehydrating. You can talk about fermentation. Any kind of food preservation question that you might have, type it in, ask it to Fawn, and she'll relate to me, and I'm going to answer it to you. So while we do this, you guys think of your questions. We're going to walk through a couple of the things that we did. In making jam, you're using your fruit and your sugar, and that works really well as a method to preserve fruit. Other things that you can use to preserve fruit is you can do sauces, you could do a puree, you could do a strawberry sauce, a peach sauce, apple sauces. And when you make a sauce, you can then further that, and if you use a dehydrator, you can make that into fruit leather. That's a pretty handy thing and useful if you've got kids at home. The other thing that you can do, and you need one specialty item, and it's called, it's called clear gel. And what you can do is make pie fillings. And this is one of my favorite things to make and can, because it tastes fantastic versus buying like a canned pie filling. If you make your own and home process your own pie filling, it's very useful and saves time when you're making a pie. You've got a quart of pie filling, you dump it in your pie plate, and there you go, you're ready, you're done. And it works fantastic for ice cream topping, for mix it in yogurt. You can use it for a lot of things. So that's another good fruit preserve item that you can try. We've got 2 minutes on our jam, and we're going to take it out of the canner, and you can see what that looks like. One of the things that we should think about when you are making jams is we did a small batch. You can double your batches. It's a volume project. And so you can go up to about 8 cups, which is about 2 quarts at a time. Any more than that, you should make it like double batches. So you could, make it that double batch twice. If you try to triple a batch or quadruple a batch, it's just the chemistry doesn't work and it won't set up. I've tried it. Even after being told you shouldn't do it, I've tried it. I promise you, it does not work. So always limit it to, you know, again, that 8 cups, 2 quarts, that's about as much as you can get. Again, you can also use a combination of fruit and a liquid. One we were talking about earlier, we added a little brandy to our peaches. You can use wine with strawberries. One of my favorites is blueberries and Guinness Stout. Another one that works really well with strawberries is ginger ale and strawberries, ginger beer. You can cut up a couple of ginger coin candies to go in there, or fresh ginger. Again, the limits are your imagination and your palate. However you want to create different flavors together is how you should do it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It usually lasts a year. Dan, my husband, just asked, he's like, how long does it last on the shelf? It lasts a year. From the day you take it out of the canner is good for 1 year. Does that mean it explodes after a year and a day? It does not. But that's the ideal recommendation. Within that 6 months kind of time period is when you should kind of inspect it. And what we mean by that is look at it. It should look the same today as it does a year from today. And so if it goes like brown or gray or has like kind of black ooze around the rim, that's bad. Don't eat it. And that goes for anything. Always take a look and inspect your home canned items before eating them. So always safety first. All right, we are good. I'm going to take these out of our canner. This is the most valuable $5 you will spend. This is a jar lifter tool. Even with my asbestos hands, I will not grab jars out of a boiling canner. Neither should you. And so what you do, taking the lid off, and you take the jars out, and we go straight up and straight over and straight down. So pick it straight up, and there's water on top of them. That's okay. It'll dry off. Straight up, straight over. All right. And we don't do anything to them. We just let them be. A lot of times people worried, like, did they seal? Oh no, I don't know. It can take up to 24 hours for a jar to seal. It usually doesn't, but it can. Well, a lot of times what you'll see is, or here's the pop. The pop doesn't really indicate anything. It's just a pop. It's just a sound. What you're really looking for is for the lid to change from kind of being, up. They call it the button. It'll kind of start going down. So, you're looking for that concave look on your thing. And it'll sound different too. Just if you tap it, it has kind of a hollow sound. So here we go. Dan's gonna help us with the camera. We're gonna look at these jars. I don't know if we can do a super close up on the jars. Here we go. Super close up on the jars. Here's one. This one's sealed already. This one, you can see the button is still up. Oh, it just went down live on the stream. You saw it here, friends. This one is still needing to seal. All right. And it just went. There you go. All right. All right, friends. We just made jam thanks to the library. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Fawn to see if we have any questions.
All right. Well, that was so great, Christina. Thank you so much. And shout out to Dan for all the help too. So we had Heidi join late, and she was asking, was it equal parts fruit and sugar? She just missed that part and was asking.
Oh, there's 2 ways, Heidi. Is if you're using regular pectin, yes, it's equal parts fruit to sugar. If you're using low sugar pectin, it's 1 part fruit and then half of sugar. So 4 cups fruit, 2 cups sugar, or 2 cups honey, 2 cups, whatever. Otherwise, it's 4 cups fruit, 4 cups sugar.
Okay, perfect. And then someone's asking, with freezer pectin, how long do you wait to see that it has set up? I noticed you didn't really measure exactly. Is there such a thing as too much pectin? Does freezer pectin work with all recipes, like your suggested strawberry basil?
Yeah, it will. I'm opening up the freezer pectin is a relatively new product, and I followed it based on the instructions here. And so it is, you know, stir sugar and pectin in the bowl, add fruit, 5 minutes, ladle in, and then it says let set about 30 minutes in the jar. So, and it should work with any combination according to their own instructions. Again, it's a relatively new product, so I'm not 100% from my own personal experience to be able to say X, Y, or Z, but they're claiming it works. It's approved by the Center for Home Food Preservation. So I say go for it, try it.
Okay, perfect. Someone's asking, I have a glass top stove. Is that okay to use for canning?
It is okay to use for canning. Usually for jams and jellies, where there's always the warning of, oh, your glass top stove will crack. I can promise you, in the years of using glass top stoves in classrooms for teaching, we've never broken one yet. But it will, if you do a lot of canning or you're trying to do pressure canning, it can scar the glass. If you're concerned about that, or if you have a convection or induction, one of those induction cooking ovens, the canners won't work on there. I would suggest getting one of those mobile propane burners or an electric burner, usually about $25. They're safe for indoor, the butane burners, and they work really well for the canners if you're worried about your glass top stove.
Okay, perfect. Mary asks, does anything happen if there's too much headspace when you process jars?
Yeah, if there's too much headspace, it's an algorithm, that headspace to the processing time to push out the air. So if you have too much headspace with the time, that means there's oxygenated air there that's left. And if there's any type of maybe remaining potential pathogen, then it has available oxygen. That's the problem, is that you could leave, it's a hurdle that's not high enough against pathogens. So that's why, you want to really closely follow those headspaces as best you can.
Okay, perfect. Someone's asking, can you add too much pectin?
Yes. Yeah, you can. A lot of the times in teaching and in writing a book and doing recipe research is I like to kind of push the boundaries and break the rules a bit to see what happens. And so I can tell you what happens is if you add too much pectin or cook something heavily in pectin down too much, it gets really, really thick. And you might be familiar with, say, like a fruit cheese, which is maybe a membrillo, which is a goal, but that's more of the heavy pectin in addition to dehydration. But if that's not what your goal is for a jam, you might not want a jam that you can, have the knife stand up in.
Cranberries at Thanksgiving.
Cranberry sauce has a lot of pectin in it. Cranberries have a lot of pectin in it. So yeah, that's what it gets, really, really stiff, really stiff.
Okay, thank you. And then someone's asking, where can you purchase the plastic jars for canning? I'm sure my coworker can drop a link in the chat if you have a suggestion too.
I do. The plastic ones are a little harder to find. I would suggest looking at, say, like a Farm and Fleet or a farm supply store, a place that has more specialty items than, say, a grocery store. Though sometimes during the season, especially a larger grocery store like a Pick and Save or Woodman's especially, will have the freezer jars.
Okay, perfect. Someone's asking, can you use fresh lemons in place of lemon juice?
No, you cannot, and I will tell you why. Is you must use bottled lemon juice. What you're looking for is an acidity. You're trying to raise the acidity level, and you do that with the bottled lemon juice because there is no set acidity level in individual lemon. In fact, the acidity in a lemon can change from lemon to lemon from the same tree. And so the best way to ensure the 4.5 pH level that we need is to use a blended bottle of lemon juice. And again, you can get organic if that's the concern. I use organic lemon juice. But yeah, you've got to use bottled stuff to get the acidity. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Someone's asking, I've recently followed another recipe, just apples and sugar, no pectin, and it never set up. Is this a pectin thing? Even though apples have natural pectin, no lemons were used either. Sorry,
Yeah.
either. They meant.
So I tell this story in my book, and it's one of my favorite little like kind of old canning things. The thing is, so canning itself is very much kind of women's work and passed down in an oral tradition. And it's only really been in the past 20 years or so are we really starting to scientifically document what's happening, and the consortium of different land-grant universities are studying this stuff. But again, if you read Little Women, there's a great story when Meg has all her jam fail because it's the same reason, not enough pectin. So like just like the lemons have varying amounts of acidity, apples will have varying amounts of pectin. And depending on the variety of the apple and where you got them from, there's no telling how much pectin is actually in them. We do know that most modern hybrid versions of varieties of apples don't have as much pectin as older heirloom varieties. So that is most likely the issue. Not enough pectin. Sorry.
Mary has a similar apple problem. She said she tried to make apple scrap jelly, but it didn't get to the gel point, and she kept cooking it, and then it turned into a hard candy consistency.
Yeah, so in the old days, I'm pro science, pre pectin, where you could add it in is you would have to either make your own pectin, which is like just a real solid apple jelly that you could then add in to your other fruit jellies, or you were there with the candy thermometer to get to the gel point, but not to the hard crack candy point. And it's a bit of a tricky business. I admire people who can do it. I can do it. If you put me to the test, I can do it. Not every time, but I can get it there. But it's a challenge. I prefer to make it easy on people. And so, unless you're going to use, I would say if you're going to try the old way, use a mix of apples, use heirloom apples. Don't forget to use the seeds. The seeds have lots of pectin in them. Use the pips. Cook it all down. And that's the mistake I think some folks make is that they're too clean. So try making it, just cook every bit of it except the stem, sieve it through like an applesauce, and then cook it further down that way. And if you're going to try a jelly, then sieve it that way, sieve the liquid out, and then you might get enough to add the sugar and then bring it up to temperature to get it to gel. That's my recommendation.
Thank you so much. Heidi asks, if I add alcohol to my jam, is that in addition to the equal parts fruit and sugar, or does it count as sugar or fruit? Also, what would be the max amount of beer or alcohol?
Well, this is one of my fun things is that you can make a jelly out of wine alone. And so, you can use, as long as the ratios total remain the same. So you could make that jelly just solely out of that 4 cups of wine. Does it go to it goes more to the volume of the measure of the fruit than the sugar, though it will affect the sweetness overall if you're using, a liqueur or a beer. So it's just a little bit, that's why jam making and canning is a little bit of an alchemy versus a hard science. So you have to kind of consider those things a little bit. Definitely, if you want to use alcohol in your jams, I recommend using a low sugar pectin, because it allows a little bit more freedom and a little less sugar. And so that can help address some of the sweetness in a wine or a beer or a liqueur that you might want to add. So definitely use a low sugar pectin for that.
Someone says they've seen liquid pectin. What is your experience with that?
Oh, it's awful. Liquid pectin is terrible. It's it is before the company started dehydrating the pectin extract into a powder, it was liquefied. And you can still buy liquid pectin, and you'll see a lot of recipes that call for liquid pectin, especially for jellies. Personally, I don't like it. It's finicky, it's tricky to use, and I'm not a fan of anything that makes itself difficult to use. So it's there, it's available. If you love it, good, go use it. I don't. The powdered pectin is a higher success rate overall.
Okay, perfect. Cindy's asking, is it possible to take instruction to become a master preserver? She believes County Extension doesn't offer it anymore. Do you know
It does
anything about
not.
that?
Yeah, it does not. No, so a master food preserver is more than just, it's not a program so you get to get good at learning how to can. It is a program that you are a service to your community, that you are become an expert, and that you volunteer to teach in your community. It is one of the programs that was cut in the budget cuts in 2010, and it has not come back. If you feel the calling, and one of the requirements for being a master food preserver is also knowing how to do it. So it's not something you can go to do as a beginner. You have to actually have a fairly extensive repertoire and understanding of the science and the methodologies, and then you can go. The only place, or the closest place, I should say, that if you wanted to go to get certified to be a master food preserver is at Purdue. So you'd have to go to Purdue.
Okay, perfect. I think that's all the questions we have right now. I'll just give everybody a few more minutes to just make sure
Okay.
there's any
Please
burning
ask.
questions.
Happy to answer.
Yeah, perfect. This is so great. And it's so neat to learn about the science of everything, you know, behind the canning process. It's very interesting.
Well, that's the way I think it is. I think everybody feels more confident doing it if you understand why you're doing it, you know, versus just reading a cookbook. If you're reading just an instruction sheet, if you don't know why you're doing something, then it doesn't always sink in, or it doesn't make sense. I'd rather have everybody understand why you're doing something. And one, I think you remember it more, and two, then you know where you can have fun and push the boundaries a little bit if you know why you're doing it.
Okay, perfect. Someone's asking, what are your favorite recipes for jam? I imagine that you have some in your book, right?
I do. I put a lot of my favorites in the book. I do like a really futzy, it takes some time to make it, but a really nice marmalade. Man, there's nothing like a really good marmalade. And there's such a difference between like a crummy one and a really well-made homemade marmalade. That's one of my favorites.
Perfect. And someone's asking, they're joining a little bit late, and they're asking the name of your book, which I'll share. It's called Preservation: The Art and Science of Canning, Fermentation, and Dehydration by Christina Ward. We do have it at the library, or you can purchase it at Boswell or at other places as well. Someone's asking, can you skip the canner? She says her mom makes jam without it.
You can skip the canner if you keep it in the refrigerator, and then it's only going to last for maybe 6 weeks, you know, ish, you know, with a lot of like, how cold is that fridge? What is it made out of? And there's a reason she's asking that question, I'll tell you. And so in the time before science is people would make jam, and they would pour hot jam or jelly into a jar, pour hot wax on top of it, and then call it a day. That's not good anymore. We know that's not good because we have science. And if we think back to our hurdle technologies, is that it was not going to really keep out any germs. The thing that really saved people, and people will say, oh, and I ate it and I never got sick. I'm glad you never got sick, but that has a lot to do also with you know, your gut biome, where you grew up, and a lot of, you know, kind of science that, you know, why you get sick and why you don't get sick. It also means that your mom probably kept a really clean kitchen too, which is great. And that the jam that she made was boiled before she poured it into the jar. But again, it is not the safest way to make jam today. And also, I will say this is we do have less gut biome. We are more susceptible to pathogens today than we were 50 years ago. So I would recommend that people follow recipes that are published only after, say, maybe 1994. That's a good cutoff, 1994.
That's very good to know. Someone's asking for freezer jams. Do you have to keep it frozen between uses?
No, you don't. Usually with freezer jam, if you're going to make a big batch, say you make 12 jars, you freeze 12 jars, you take one out, defrost it, and then keep it in the refrigerator while you're using it, and then that's fine. And then, pull out another one. So no, you just keep it in the fridge while you're using it down. Or unless you're like us, you get like 12 jars of jam open in the fridge at the same time.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm just getting lots of thank yous and some recommendations to check Amazon too for the plastic freezer canning.
Oh, good.
There was that question.
Good.
So, yeah.
Good. I've heard that they've been out lately. So good if they have it, but know that you might, have to check other resources for those freezer jars.
Okay, perfect. I also want to mention that we host a vegetarian cookbook club that meets the first Wednesday of every month. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check our calendar for other food things. And we have the dilly beans program next week. I also want to put in a plug for the census. If you haven't filled out the census yet, it's a great time to do that. Census data is used to determine funding for key federal programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Section 8 housing, school lunch programs, Title I school funding, and other critical programs that directly impact our communities. And it also helps determine our political power and representation in Congress, as well as the implementation of crucial civil rights policy. So just wanted to give them a plug also to fill that out, and please tell your family and friends to do that as well. And I'm just getting lots of thank yous in the comments that everybody learned a lot, and it's 7 o'clock on the nose, so we're right on time. Thank you so much, Christina. We had a great time and learned a lot.
Oh, thank you so much, everybody, for putting up with our technical difficulties and for coming along for the ride. Thank you.
This is also going to be recorded, or it was recorded, so we will be posting it on our YouTube page. So if you have anything that you missed that you wanted to add, I just have one more question. I just want to make sure. Oh, it's just a thank you. So lots of thank yous. All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, everybody, and have a good night.
Right. Have a great night, everyone. Make some jam.